Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm calling to order this meeting of the Planning and Development Council of the Town of Oakville. Welcome, and Madam Clerk, I know that I think the only regrets we have is Councillor Pavan Parmar, who is, as we all know, on maternity leave, and we just got to see her beautiful baby daughter, now 2 months old. So she's obviously ready to get out in the public more. We need to canvass you for declarations of pecuniary interest, Council. Madam Clerk, there doesn't seem to be any. Now, if 2 members of Council would give us a motion and a second to resolve in the Committee of the Whole, we can proceed. Councillor Lischita and Councillor Sanju, all in favor? That carries. And we're now in the Committee of the Whole session, as we always are for planning matters, which relaxes the rules for more discussion. Tonight, the only item in the discussion world is the consent item. Is the provincial policy statement review, which we're going to get to in a second. But first, we have the consent item being the assumption of Bronny Creek Manor, which is Marquet Homes condo, and the matter is routine. That's why it's on the consent agenda. Now I'm looking for a hand.
I'll move it.
Councillor Elgar moves it. May I put the vote? All in favor? Opposed, if any, and that has been consented to. Now we come to the discussion item, and we have a presentation from the indefatigable Kirk Bigger, our senior planner. And Mr. Bigger, we're looking forward to your presentation. This is a matter that the public who are watching may be quite interested in, because it's changing by reduction the role of local people in the planning process and the development process that's associated with growth. So we're all ears. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members of council. Good evening. I have a short presentation and look forward to questions following. And this is, as mentioned, item 2 in your agenda, page 11. Just an overview of the points I'm going to cover, just some key facts to highlight. Again, a highlight summary of the Halton Area Planning Partnership joint submission, some additional town comments that we're submitting to the province, and the recommendation for this evening. So essentially some key facts. The province of Ontario is proposing changes to the provincial policy statement, and those proposed changes have been released on the Environmental Registry of Ontario. And we've had a 91-day comment period, which is closing October 21st, which is why we're before you this evening. The changes are brought forward in support of the provincial initiative entitled More Homes, More Choice, Ontario's Housing Supply Action Plan, and that was released earlier in the year, May 2019. The proposed changes are intended to help increase the supply of housing, support jobs, and reduce barriers and costs associated with the land use planning system. In response to those proposed changes, town staff have participated in a joint submission with the Halton Area Planning Partnership, and that's summarized in the report. Additional town comments are also included, as I mentioned. And just adjust your mic here. Somebody's moved it. So, it's directional. I'm pointed in the wrong way. Thanks. I hope you can hear me now. Better. I'll speak up as well. So the Halton Area Planning Partnership consists of Halton Region, the 4 local municipalities of Burlington, Oakville, Halton Hills, and Milton, as well as the conservation authorities, Credit Valley Conservation, and Conservation Halton. So that's our policy partnership, and we comment on provincial initiatives as they come forward. We submit to the province a joint submission, and so those are all the points that we can achieve consensus on as a group. So the highlights of our joint submission include, there's basically 8 main highlights. There's been a shift in some of the language in the PPS to go from a shall to a should in terms of the language, which is really, we're using the term softening, a lessening of the requirements to fulfill that type of policy. And we think that some of these changes are better left as a shall. Some of the concerns are that the municipality's ability to enforce good planning decisions or to compel good planning decisions may be undermined through that. There have been some changes to permit mineral aggregate extraction in natural heritage features. That's not specifically an Oakville matter, but it's of great concern at the regional level. And we've submitted that we would maintain a strong position as a region to not permit that, as we have for a long period of time here. There's considerations for climate change, adaptation, and mitigation in the new PPS, or the proposed changes. And actually, there's a lot of support for this type of language coming into this document, but we feel it's only gone halfway, if you will. There's recognition that there are impacts of a changing climate in our municipalities, in our cities, in our urban areas, in our region, but that the references are to adaptation, and it doesn't really address the root causes of climate change, which would be more of a mitigation strategy. So when we talk about climate change action, we talk about mitigation and adaptation, and so the recommendations are to introduce as well some of that mitigation language into the provincial policy statement. There's several references through the proposed changes dealing with implementation guidelines, and those guidelines haven't been released yet, and so it's been difficult through this process to provide a thorough commentary without having all the information at hand. So the advice then from HAP to the province is to prepare those guidelines, bring them out for engagement so that they can be reviewed and refined with the input from municipalities, which will help those later implementation tasks to occur. Some of the other changes are around the implementation and interpretation section of the PPS. And these are policies that deal with how we would go about implementing certain aspects. And some of those policies have been removed or deleted from that section and placed or identified in the preamble. And so there's a concern that de-emphasizes the importance of that type of requirement when you're guiding planning decisions. The next three areas have also emerged as highlights across the province in multiple stakeholder engagements. And so your town staff has participated in some workshops organized by the province, and these last 3 points here have emerged as common themes throughout all those engagements. So we're happy to see that we weren't off the mark with our comments, but also, again, that there's some broad-based concern around where some of these changes are headed. And so the first one that I'll highlight here is these references introduced into the policies around market tests. And market tests can be used as a way to justify housing development or perhaps to expand settlement boundaries. And it seems also that in some of the language that the market consideration is placed higher than some of the other important policy matters that need to be considered on balance through development review. So the main comment is to the province that market doesn't belong in the PPS and that it doesn't really serve to implement some of the provincial interests. So that's pretty much our main comment. There is, as you've been following along all these provincial changes over the last year or so, what you see in the proposal is kind of typically what you're going to get in the final. So we're not sure where this is going to land. So we may be in a situation where we are now using market as one of the factors that we look at when we're evaluating development applications. The next point is about proposed changes that prioritize development applications. So there's a direction in the proposed changes to fast track and put a higher priority on certain types of development applications. But that direction isn't clear or defined. And so there's some uncertainty around what that would mean, again, here for us as a council and as a staff group looking at development applications. And in addition, you may recall through Bill 108, changes to the Planning Act, also shortened some of the review timelines that we're now obligated to follow for planning applications. And so those two factors combined have caused some concern that we really won't have enough time to properly evaluate and properly assess development applications in order to provide for complete communities and all the things that matter most to us. It also has implications for public engagement as well, and how much input can you get along the way when it's really shortened like that. And the last point is, again, another area of support generally, that there have been some really positive changes in the PPS proposed around Indigenous engagement. And what the comment back up to the province is to say, we think this is really a good change, but that we need further direction on how we would actually implement that. So who, how, when, where would we engage effectively with Indigenous communities? In addition to the HAP joint submission, the report highlights a couple areas of additional town staff comments, and I've just sort of summarized them here. There's some, in the employment areas section of the proposed changes, there's a new policy that emphasizes the importance of local official plans when evaluating the planned function of employment areas. So say we're going through our official plan review, does this employment area still meet the needs of the community, the planned function, or does that need to change? And we support that type of language, the use of the term local, that Oakville town staff are submitting that to the province, because we think the local planning authority is the best suited authority for determining the future of those employment areas. The second one is around, again, employment areas, and there's a suite of policies, and in that series of policies, there's one policy that's promoting the restriction of residential uses in heavy industrial type employment areas. And we do also support that policy here at the town staff position, is that we support that policy. When you read all those policies together, what we think the province's intent is to provide a bit of a range or a bit of a spectrum of employment area policies that restrict over here but are a bit more permissive or flexible over there. And so we thought that was a really good way to look at some of our mixed use areas that are around our Bronte Go station, for example. So certainly we don't want housing sensitive uses against heavy industrial, but in some places it might be appropriate to be a little more flexible and provide for a little more mix. So that is the highlights of the report. And here's a summary of the recommendations. That the report titled Province of Ontario Provincial Policy Statement Review Proposed Policies, July 2019. That's the title of the province's document. Our report dated September 16th, 2019 be endorsed. And that the report be submitted to the Ministry of Municipal Affairs and Housing by the deadline of October 21st, 2019. And that the report be forwarded to our municipal partners in the region for their information. That's the conclusion of my remarks, and if there are any questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
Thank you, Mr. Bigger. Councillor O'Meara.
Thank you, Mr. Bigger, and I'm not sure where you might be able to help me out here, or even if this is the correct response document, but I believe the previous government had included in I believe the reforms for the Ontario Building Code to help address climate mitigation, that new builds would have electric vehicle charging infrastructure built within the new homes that they were building. And then I understand that was repealed in one of the changes that have happened over the past year. And I'm wondering if this is an opportunity to maybe ask for that back somewhere in this document. I was looking at page 35 where we talk about some of the housing options and some of the infrastructure, but I'm not sure if this is the appropriate place. But I think it's important that we advocate for pennies on the dollars that people will have to spend, and in terms of how we move forward. Is this the right place somewhere here to put a response like that in, or am I missing the mark a little?
Councillor, in a word, no, this is not the right place. It's a building code thing. But you raise a good point. I think a resolution by this council, perhaps at the next council meeting, calling the province's attention to our belief that it should be returned and restored would be a perfectly good way to call their attention to it.
Perfect. Thank you for the clarification.
Councillor Sanju.
Thank you, Mayor Burton. Sorry, I've just lost my note. I'm going to go back and find it. Actually, two questions. One is, we were talking a little bit about local. Do we, and this is kind of like a nitpicky comment, but do we know for sure that local is used in the same terminology at the provincial level as it is for us? Yeah?
Yes,
Okay.
Councillor, through you, Mr. Chair. We're confident the distinction between local and upper tier is in the
It's pretty
province's
clear.
mind. Yes.
Okay, pretty clear. And the second piece is just kind of banking off of what Councillor O'Meara was just saying, and maybe this is a question for Mayor Burton. I think that on the other side of the spectrum, besides the vehicle charging stations, some of the concerns that we see in our ward are the quality or the lack thereof of what's available at a new home level. And that might be something that we want to go into another council discussion, but I wanted to kind of put that out on the table, that from a provincial level, or at least at a local level, we don't have the ability to turn around and say to our developers in the area, one working toilet isn't enough for our constituents, especially with a $2 million home. So that might be something that we want to come back to at another time as well. And I realize that wouldn't be this document. Thank you.
Your remedy is the same as Councillor O'Meara's, and I know that council, on behalf of all residents who are suffering from the changes at Tarion, would probably welcome an initiative that you might bring forward.
Excellent. I would be happy to bring that forward with you, Mayor Burton. Thank you.
All right.
Thank you, staff.
Our well-experienced staff can guide you offline in the crafting of that. Over here, other hands? Councillor Giddings.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just curious, I didn't quite hear the full answer on Councillor Sandhu's question regarding the local. Could you just run that by me one more time?
Mr. Bigger said that the staff are confident that the province knows the difference between local and upper tier. And I'll supplement his answer by telling you that the use of the word local is in the statute that sets us up. So it's unlikely to be in any doubt.
Although they aren't, and that's the clarity that they provide.
Well, for now, the local level exists.
All right, if I may, the item 4, are there any other policy changes that are needed? The document talks about the need for more emphasis on prioritizing affordable and sustainable housing, which has been something that the current government has been talking about regularly. I don't see a lot of clarity in here in terms of revisions to make homes more affordable. Is this just through some of their updates, they feel that will occur?
Well, not to speak on behalf of the province.
Your understanding of it?
Yes, my understanding, I think wherever, and we do this locally in our official plan, through our planning documents, we're always aiming for a range and mix. And when you have a broader range and a broader mix, that will begin to address some affordability issues. So you have a broad base of supply, and that could affect some of your affordability issues. So I think that's a little bit how they're tackling it, but the definition of affordability and how that's measured, and it's really a relative term, and in some communities, affordable is different than in other communities. And so it's hard to solve that through these types of
Fair enough.
planning.
One of the comments was the affected settlement areas are not in the green belt, and the feedback is that HAP strongly supports this policy addition. Do you feel that this provides a degree of surety that the green belt is safe?
So
Or
I
whether
don't-
the intent of the document may lead us in that direction?
I think that there was concern initially when this government took office that the green, or in the prelude to it, that the Greenbelt was under threat. Every meeting we go to with the province now, they begin the meeting by saying, and we're not touching the Greenbelt. So that they have attempted to make that very clear to us in every engagement. So I would, on the face of it, accept that.
Thanks.
Anyone else? Councillor Haslett-Thiel.
Thank you for this, and people may think I'm strange, but I thought this was fascinating to read. So I have two questions. One is a comment. I didn't see highlighted in the summary the comment around HAP recommends that not increase be maintained rather than amending the proposed text to the words mitigate. And it's on page 62 of our report. It's in section 1.6.6.7. And to me, that was a really sort of a major call out on behalf of the committee that drafted this, that it shouldn't be about mitigating risk. It should be clearly not increasing the risks. And I just wondered why in the conversation that didn't show up in the final document.
So sorry, you were saying on page 61 of the?
62 of the
62, pardon me.
provincial, and it's section 1.6.6.7.
Right, so, again, this is a reference to a change in a policy test that's occurred through the proposed changes.
Right,
And not every word-by-word play in the table summary would necessarily make it into a summary of the report. But
okay,
it is part of the submission, and so those comments are being carried forward to the province.
okay, but it just didn't make the summary, okay.
I think,
Yeah,
sorry, Counselor, just to finish through you, Mr. Chair, it's a more difficult test, not increase versus mitigate, and so HAP's recommending that we maintain the more difficult test, a higher standard.
Right, okay, all right, thank you for that clarification. And then the other is the reference to a new regional economic development body. Can you just maybe expand on what you think that might mean?
Well, through you, Mr. Chair, to the councillor, this fits in the category of there's all kinds of great ideas without supporting direction or documents or guidelines. So there's a lot of uncertainty about what that meant. The view from HAP was that an additional body to try and help with planning and land use development might not be necessary. We have economic development agencies established already. Certainly, we can rely more on those in the work that we do, and we didn't need this extra unknown type of body being introduced into our system. So that was pretty much the comment. We don't know what it means other than additional provincial influence on our work and our local community.
It's troubling because they haven't defined it, and no matter how they define it, it's impossible to imagine it to be anything but another layer of red tape.
Right, well, that's kind of why I pulled it out, I went, so I thought the objective was to streamline and make us, and that just seems like we're adding. Okay.
Just change the subject of your sentence. They're adding.
Sorry, they're adding, sorry. Thank you for the clarifications.
Councillor Adam.
Thank you very much for the report. I appreciate all the work that's gone into it, going through with fine-tooth comb, trying to pick out each of the changes that have been made and identifying what they mean. I know that a number of my colleagues were around when we fought with the province over trying to get them to go from the should to shall, and now we're going back again, and I'm sure Councillor Elgar is equally disappointed by the changes of the should and shall over the years, because we fought bitterly to try and get them to go to where they're now they're ripping out what we fought so hard to get, and I'm disappointed by that, as I'm sure many others are. Says the mayor. And so the only question I had for you is there any reason that we couldn't forward this to all of our MPPs? Because one of the things that I think we're discovering in our discussions with them is that they may not always be as aware as we might hope they are of the planning issues that are going on behind the scenes in their government.
Through you, Mr. Chair, to the councillor, I don't see a reason why you wouldn't send it to the MPPs.
Thank you very much. Then,
Councillor, what a gentle way you have of saying that. May I suggest that we also add that we circulate it to AMO, since AMO claims to be talking to the government about these matters.
thank you very much. I'd like to add that as an addition.
Anyone else? Before we consider the motion, I would just like to say a couple things. What we're seeing here is yet again a case where it says, or the province says, that it's going to, quote, reduce costs for development. And to us, they tell us, but don't worry, we'll protect the taxpayer from paying more for development. And those are just like contradictory on their face, they're contradictions. And so this is just another startling example of the requirement that we hold in our mind two opposite things at the same time. And at the same time, we're also seeing here the continuing reduction and even removal of the public from the local end of land use planning and development decisions. And that is something that goes against the grain of the Oakville community, because this is a community that's always cared passionately about how we will grow. And when I look at those two things and the speed ups, which further reduce the public's opportunity, it's clear to me that this government for the people is a government for the people who are developers and not for people who are residents of Oakville and taxpayers. And with that, I'll look for a mover for the motion as changed. I have so many to pick from. I'll go with Councillor Giddings. All those in favor? Opposed, if any? And that's carried. Thank you, everybody. We now have a confidential discussion item. And the chair is going to turn to the ward in which it originates. And if the councillor is, let's find out from the councillor what we're going to do. Councillor Duddick.
Thank you, Your Worship. I had an opportunity to talk to legal prior to the meeting, and both myself and Councillor Chisholm are very pleased to move the staff recommendation, have no need to go in camera.
All right, thank you. So in the public agenda, we have this confidential item. So the motion being moved by the councillor is that, one, with respect to the town position on the neighbors' appeals of Committee of Adjustment Decision CAV A98 2018, 1201 Sterling Drive, to the Local Planning Appeal Tribunal, the town not oppose the COA decision and be in attendance at the hearing to request that the LPAT, if it approves any or all of the variances, impose the same conditions as the Committee of Adjustment did, because that's one of the risks of an appeal. And second, that in consultation with the Director of Planning Services and/or his designate, the town solicitor and/or his designate be authorized to facilitate a proposed settlement of the appeal, either before or at the tribunal hearing, if requested to do so by the neighbor appellants and the site owner, in a manner that addresses their concerns and is in keeping with the planning policies and bylaws of the town. May I put the vote? All in favor? Opposed, if any? And that carries. Thank you, everybody. We now turn to the advisory committee minutes. And here, we need a motion that the following recommendation pertaining to item 6A of Heritage Oakville Advisory Committee minutes from the September 24th meeting be approved and the remainder of the minutes received. The approval is for the construction of a new two-story addition and attached garage at 215 William Street. And it's recommended that it be approved subject to several conditions as listed in the agenda. Discussion, motion, Councillor Giddings. May I put the vote? All in favor? Opposed, if any? That carries. Thank you. Would someone like to move that we rise and report to council? Councillor Grant. All those in favor? And that carries. I rise and report that the Committee of the Whole has met and has made recommendations on consent item 1, discussion item 2, confidential discussion item C1, and advisory committee minutes item 3, as noted by the clerk. May I have a mover and seconder for the report? Councillor Chisholm and Councillor Knoll. All those in favor? And the report is adopted. Council, are there matters of an emergency, congratulatory, or condolence nature that anyone would like to bring forward? Thank you. Then perhaps a motion and a second for the bylaws would be in order. Councillor Elgar, Councillor Duddick, all in favor? The bylaws are adopted as published in the agenda. That completes our work together tonight. For everyone interested in the federal political scene, you have time to get to a television to see the debate. It's been terrific working with you, and we are adjourned.